We stand with Captain Traoré. We stand with Traoré because we know that Traoré stands for the unity of Africa. We are Traoré, and Traoré is all of us. If they kill Traoré, you must know they would have created another wound in the continent of Africa.
The West tried to kill a man, but instead they gave birth to a movement. Across Africa, presidents are no longer whispering rebellion. They're declaring it. From boardrooms to battlefields, a silent oath is echoing louder. We are all Traoré. But what does that mean? Why now? Did something silently happen in Africa? Let's find out. It wasn't a fiery revolutionary or a headline-chasing populist who threw the first stone. It was Botswana's President Duma Gideon Boko, a leader often viewed as quiet, composed, and cautious. That's what made it all the more shocking when he stood before the African Union and delivered a warning not to the West, but to his fellow African leaders. If we say we support Traoré, our actions must show it. This wasn't a metaphor, it was a challenge.
We have begun to lay the foundations. COMESA, EAC, SADC, tripartite free trade area, now the African continental free trade area, must become markers and references of this epic journey, this revolution that seeks to transform lives, empower people, real people. And so we are here today to declare our commitment to this cause. I know my brother, the President of the Republic of Zambia, is an able foot soldier in this revolution. I join you too. I call upon others across the African continent, those who sit at the highest echelons of leadership in their countries, to transcend words, move to action.
For years, African heads of state have been caught between two worlds, the world of independence and the world of dependency. On the podiums, they speak of sovereignty, dignity, and African unity. But in the halls of economic forums and IMF negotiations, they bow, politely, silently, sometimes desperately. The West knows this game and has exploited it for decades. But something about Duma Boko's statement shattered that pattern. He wasn't just speaking about Traoré, he was speaking about all of them. Because what's happening in Burkina Faso, the uprisings, the defiance, the purge of foreign military bases, is no longer a localized event. It's a litmus test, a measure of who is truly ready to walk the walk. Duma Boko knows this, and in breaking his silence, he indirectly forced every other African leader to answer a terrifying question. Are you ready to be next? His words weren't fire, they were ice. And in that chilling tone lay the most dangerous idea of all: accountability. For decades, African disunity has been fertilized by one thing: fear. Fear of coups, fear of sanctions, fear of losing Western aid. But Duma Boko, by aligning himself with Traoré publicly, tossed that fear aside and replaced it with something far more contagious: responsibility. He was saying that neutrality is no longer an option. In the age of open coups and silent wars, you either support African sovereignty or you support its suppression. This marks a historic turning point for Botswana, a country often used by Western media as an example of model democracy, a darling of World Bank charts and economist cover stories. But even this model has now understood that respectability does not mean immunity. Duma Boko's pivot may be more strategic than symbolic, because beneath the calm surface of Botswana lies a storm brewing, a population increasingly aware that resource wealth does not mean freedom. Diamonds don't mean dignity, and stability without sovereignty is just quiet colonization. And let's not forget, Botswana is landlocked, dependent on regional cooperation and trade routes for survival. If the tide of Pan-Africanism rises and borders dissolve, Botswana's future hinges not on the West, but on the very neighbors it once kept at diplomatic arm's length. Duma Boko may have realized something crucial. Aligning with Traoré is not just about politics, it's about survival. But more importantly, his statement shattered a long-standing myth in African politics, that you have to be loud to be revolutionary. Sometimes, the most dangerous voices are the calmest ones. By framing his support as a matter-of-fact reality rather than a dramatic gesture, Duma Boko gave other quiet leaders a script to follow. And that's what terrifies the West the most, when the silent start to speak. This shift is not a coincidence. It is part of a deeper pattern. Across the continent, leaders are beginning to reevaluate their positions. The West is losing its grip, not because of military defeat, but because its favorite strategy, divide and rule, is unraveling. For the first time in decades, African presidents are asking the same question, not to their former colonizers, but to each other. What if we stopped waiting? What if we led ourselves? Botswana's president didn't need to burn a flag or make a viral speech. He simply said what needed to be said, that if you claim to support Traoré, if you claim to support African liberation, then you must prove it. And that's where the pressure is now shifting. Not on Traoré, not on Burkina Faso, but on every African leader still clinging to the myth that neutrality is safe. Duma Boko lit a quiet fuse. And while it may not have exploded yet, the sparks are already leaping from country to country. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. While Botswana's Duma Boko lit the spark of responsibility, Zambia's Hakainde Hichilema has taken a different approach, one that doesn't shout, but builds. He hasn't declared himself part of the Traoré wave through viral speeches or populist outcries. Instead, he's offering something even more dangerous to the West, a working model. In a continent riddled with problems, collapsed currencies, food insecurity, and broken infrastructure, it has long been assumed that only Western aid or IMF packages can resuscitate life. But Hichilema has subtly challenged that assumption by doing something few leaders have dared. He turned disaster into opportunity. And in doing so, he may have proved that Africa doesn't need saving. It just needs space to build.
As we know them today, changes in the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, this one is a major change. Yes, we can complain about ARVs not being paid for by other taxpayers outside Africa. Yes, we can complain about development assistance shrinking. I actually think that this is a wake-up call to Africa, that we've been doing things wrongly for too many years, waiting for someone to do mundane things for us. We must do those things ourselves. An ordinary coin has two sides. Yes, there's disruption coming through. Let's flip the coin on the other side. And that's where we think we in Africa must pay particular attention, the side of opportunity. Like coerced opportunity, but it's an opportunity, a great one for that matter.
When Traoré rose to power, many said his Burkina Faso was too war-torn, too poor, too broken to stand alone. But instead of playing the victim, he turned sanctions into strategy, replacing Western aid with regional partnerships, mobilizing youth labor, and ramping up domestic production. It is this pattern, this refusal to be defined by disaster, that now mirrors Hichilema's thinking. Zambia, too, has been through chaos. Massive debt, inflation spikes, and public unrest nearly broke the country before Hichilema stepped in. But instead of taking the typical route, foreign loans, slow reforms, dependence on Western think tanks, he focused on rebuilding internal capacity. Agriculture, mining, local industry, the things Africans have been told they can't run without foreign experts. He asked a radical question: What if the crisis is our only chance to escape dependency? This is what makes Hichilema's alignment with Traoré's philosophy so powerful, even if it's unspoken. Traoré is defiant. Hichilema is methodical. But both are rejecting the same lie, that Africa cannot govern itself without guidance from those who once enslaved it. And that's the real threat to the global system, because the West isn't afraid of African chaos. It thrives on it. Chaos justifies foreign bases, emergency aid, and surveillance. But African efficiency, African solutions, that's the nightmare scenario. That's what cuts off the oxygen to the global aid industry, the arms trade, and the economic manipulation game. When Hichilema told a crowd, "This is Africa's time. We cannot afford to waste it again," he wasn't just motivating. He was revealing something deeper. That crisis is not the end of Africa. It's the beginning. Just like Traoré made Burkina Faso's gold industry independent under pressure, Hichilema is transforming Zambia's copper sector. He's renegotiating contracts, improving transparency, and attempting to keep profits within African borders. That's not just smart governance, that's revolution, disguised as reform. And make no mistake, the West is watching. Because if Zambia succeeds without strings, if Burkina Faso thrives without foreign troops, if Africa starts turning collapse into rebirth, then what legitimacy do World Bank reforms, UN development goals, or NATO operations have left? The deeper connection between Hichilema and Traoré is not style, it's strategy. Both are reshaping the concept of African power. For decades, African strength was seen only through numbers, population, military, and resources. But these leaders are flipping that. They are showing that real strength lies in resilience, in the refusal to be pitied or tamed. And more importantly, Hichilema is showing a generation of African leaders that being soft-spoken doesn't mean being soft. You don't need to scream to defy the West, you just need to stop obeying. His silence is strategic. While others are yelling at cameras, he is rearranging systems, creating networks, drafting trade deals that go south-south, not north-south, partnering with African nations, not European ones, choosing BRICS over Brussels. The first leaders sparked action. The second converted crisis into an opportunity. But Julius Malema, he brought the fire. While presidents like Duma, Boko, and Hichilema chose diplomacy and development, Malema stormed the political stage with a message that cut through pleasantries. This is no longer politics, this is war. Malema's voice, though not presidential, echoes louder than most. Why? Because he speaks the language of confrontation, not compromise. And in today's Africa, where leaders are finally starting to move beyond appeasement, Malema has become the truth serum. The man who says what others only dare to think. In a rally charged with fury after Donald Trump announced he would end U.S. aid to South Africa over land reforms, Malema didn't hold back. "You can take your aid. We don't need your blood money," he declared. But the line that struck deepest wasn't aimed at Washington. It was aimed at Africa. He asked, "How many of you will still shake Trump's hand after this? How many of you will still bow to a man who wants to punish Africans for reclaiming their land?" That question is haunting, because it forces African leaders to make a choice. Either align with those fighting for sovereignty, or be exposed as collaborators with the forces that have always sought to dominate this continent. What Malema understands better than most is that Western manipulation doesn't always come with bombs and boots. Sometimes it arrives with a checkbook and a handshake. And this soft power, sanctions, media narratives, economic pressure, has been far more effective at controlling Africa than colonial armies ever were. So when he says, "Stand with Traoré, stand with China, stand with Russia," he's not just listing names. He's outlining a new alliance map, one that dares to imagine a world where Africa no longer looks to Paris, London, or Washington for validation, but instead to Moscow, Beijing, and other southern allies who, for all their flaws, are not holding the continent hostage to humiliation and dependency.
Of Africa, we must defend China for defying the USA and telling the USA to go to hell because they don't understand how the tariffs works. Donald Trump is an enemy of himself and all of us, and he must know the EFF is not scared of him. The EFF is not scared of Israel.
This is where Malema's role becomes critical. He isn't a diplomat. He's a disruptor. While presidents strategize, he agitates. He keeps the streets awake while the leaders work behind the scenes. And in doing so, he ensures that this moment of African awakening doesn't get pacified into another bureaucratic cycle of resolutions and reforms. What makes his intervention so timely is the very real threat that Western powers still pose to this movement. After Traoré's rise, Burkina Faso faced media smears, economic pressure, and silent diplomatic isolation. The message was clear: step out of line, and you will be made an example. But Traoré didn't fold, and that example is now spreading. Malema's job is to protect that momentum by calling out the hypocrisy before it becomes policy. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: some African leaders are still afraid to lose loans, afraid to lose Western favor, afraid to pick a side. But Malema's rhetoric is designed to eliminate that gray area. There is no middle ground between colonizer and liberated, between betrayer and brother. And that clarity is why Malema is not just a voice. He's a necessary pressure point. His calls to reject U.S. intimidation are not anti-American for the sake of being loud. They are anti-imperialist at their core. When he says Africa must never kneel again, he means never. Not for Trump, not for Biden, not for any Western leader offering help with hidden handcuffs. More than that, Malema is building emotional unity. Where Duma Boko brought accountability and Hichilema brought innovation, Malema brings identity. He makes African resistance feel personal, emotional, alive. When he says, "We will not allow the West to pick which Africans can speak and which must be silenced," it's not a campaign line, it's a cultural reset. Because for too long, Africans have been divided between the respectable ones welcomed in Davos and the radicals blacklisted in Brussels. Malema is demanding the end of that false binary, and he's right. The world cannot claim to support African democracy while punishing any leader who dares to challenge Western control. It cannot preach freedom while threatening countries like South Africa, Zimbabwe, or Burkina Faso for taking control of their land, gold, or people. Malema's speech wasn't just a rejection of Trump. It was a challenge to every African who still believes they can win freedom by being polite. He's saying the era of submission is over. The only thing left is allegiance. You either stand with African allies or you stand against them. Now let's ask one question. What do all these leaders want who are standing behind Traoré? After action, after reinvention, after choosing sides, comes the most radical idea of all: dissolving the very lines that keep Africa divided. Because what good is resistance, opportunity, and solidarity if every African is still treated like a foreigner in Africa? That's the warning Julius Malema issued next, and this time it was not aimed at the West. It was aimed straight at African leaders. Why do we need visas to visit each other? He asked. Why must Africans beg for entry into African land? It was more than a question. It was an indictment. Because buried beneath all the speeches of African unity lies a map etched by colonial hands. Lines that never belonged to Africans. Borders that were carved in Berlin in 1884, not by tribes or cultures or languages, but by European greed. To this day, those borders remain intact, not only physically, but mentally and bureaucratically. Africans cannot travel freely across their continent. They must apply, pay, wait, and sometimes be denied by their brothers and sisters. Malema's fury is rooted in this absurdity, and he's right. What kind of unity exists when freedom ends at your neighbor's border post? The West does not fear Africa's guns. It fears Africa's movement, unity in action. That's the true threat. Because when Africans move freely, trade flows, cultures connect, economies integrate, and identities merge into something that no longer answers to Europe or America. And yet the borders remain. Why? Because they serve a purpose, a neo-colonial one. Visa regimes, tariffs, and customs bottlenecks aren't just annoying formalities. They are the modern tools of containment. They ensure that African nations remain locked into their colonial supply chains. Nigeria can't feed Benin. Kenya can't build for Burundi. Zimbabwe can't export to Malawi without red tape that mysteriously vanishes when it comes to Europe. So when Malema says drop the visas, he's not being dramatic. He's outlining a strategic blow to the very heart of the Western playbook. It's worth asking, Why is it that Europe, after centuries of war, managed to build a European Union where citizens cross borders without a passport, where one currency reigns, and where unity, however fragile, is taken seriously? But Africa, which shares more than language and land, still operates like a stitched-up collection of rival colonies? Because it was never meant to unite, it was meant to serve. That's what makes Malema's final call so dangerous. He's not just rallying people, he's rallying mobility. The kind of mobility that could finally make Pan-Africanism more than an idea, but a lived experience. Imagine what it would look like. A Togolese engineer opens shop in Angola without paperwork. A Burkinabe student studies in Nairobi on the same tuition terms as locals. A South African doctor practices in Sierra Leone without restrictions. Goods flow from Dakar to Dar es Salaam on railroads built by Africans, not funded by Western donors. This isn't fantasy. Its infrastructure is waiting to be unlocked. And here's the irony. The West knows it. That's why every attempt at African integration has been quietly sabotaged or buried in endless technical working groups. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, a dream still stuck in red tape. The African Union passport, announced years ago, still not widely available. Visa-free regimes, still under discussion. But now voices like Malema's are cutting through the excuses. And it's catching on. Rwanda and Ghana have dropped visa requirements for Africans. Kenya followed suit, and more nations are inching toward opening their borders, not to the world, but to each other. This is the final stage of defiance, destroying the colonial software still running Africa's operating system. Because without free movement, African unity is just a photo op, and Malema is daring leaders to admit it. He said it best, the West divided us with borders. Let's not keep fighting on their command. This moment is not just about rejecting the West, it's about rejecting the logic that the West left behind. A logic that says you must distrust your neighbor, that you must treat fellow Africans like threats. That freedom ends where colonial ink dried on a map over a century ago. Traoré didn't just reject France, he redrew what is possible. Duma Boko demanded action. Hichilema made the crisis a tool. Malema is telling the rest, now erase the barriers, physically, economically, mentally. Because in the end, a united Africa won't come from handshakes at summits. It will come when an African in Timbuktu can travel to Cape Town without showing anything but pride. That's the nightmare the West fears the most. So now the question isn't whether African leaders will act, it's whether they'll dare to open the gates. And finally, let Africa in. Because if one Traoré scared the world, what happens when all of Africa becomes borderless and unstoppable? Do you believe that if all African leaders unite, the West will lose its grip on the continent? Let us know in the comments section. Do you support this rising wave of African unity? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.